On the eve of the latest OPEC meetings, we have word of what the cartel plans to do with its production levels. Also, President Obama returns from Copenhagen claiming victory. I talked with two leaders from the environment community about the relative success of the climate conference. And the mayor of a European capital announces plans for a major push toward plug-in electric vehicles.
From the Energy News Center in Washington, D.C., this is the Energy Report with Susan McGinnis.
And good afternoon, I'm Tyler Suiters in for Susan McGinnis. Thanks for joining us for this Monday afternoon edition of the Energy Report. Right now, OPEC is on the verge of opening its latest round of meetings. This time, the round will take place in Angola, and it looks like the cartel will leave its production levels unchanged. Ministers with OPEC say they are satisfied with current crude prices, which have been fairly steady, right around or more than $70 a barrel. OPEC leaders say oil demand in China, India, as well as the other emerging economies, that demand growth will support prices through the first quarter of 2010. Now, despite that growing demand, a drop in the U.S. dollar value had crude prices sliding today. Oil settled at $73.72 a barrel, down 70 cents on the day. Natural gas also lost ground. It closed the day 11 cents down to $5.68 per 1,000 cubic feet. And it looks like OPEC's wish will certainly come true in China. Platts is reporting that Chinese oil demand last month soared almost 19% since the same time last year. That makes it the third straight month that the world's second largest oil consumer has posted double-digit yearly demand growth. The latest December figures show that China's demand is at 8.22 million barrels a day. Chinese government's $586 billion stimulus program to boost domestic spending and consumption as well is now resulting in greater use of oil products, everything from naphtha to jet fuel. And that has the IEA raising its forecast overall. It's now calling for China's oil demand to increase by about 80,000 barrels a day for both this year and 2010. Although he is now back onto health care, a contentious issue here in Washington, President Obama did spend part of his weekend trumpeting his success in Copenhagen. He came home with a climate agreement in hand, just not the binding agreement that would have branded that conference a triumph overall. Still, the climate community generally seems to be enthusiastic about this deal, especially after coming so close to leaving Copenhagen empty-handed altogether. Today, I talked with Worldwatch's Flavin and also Jonathan Lash of the World Resources Institute, both of them just back from the conference, and I asked them about the Copenhagen Accord. Is it, in their minds, a full success or merely a mitigated success?
A mitigated success, in my view. The conference clearly did not achieve everything that had been hoped for a year ago. But expectations have been steadily declining throughout the last year. And really the name of the game at this point is China and the United States and moving our two countries forward. And arguably that occurred in the final agreement. But I do think stepping back from all of this, the whole process itself is going to need to be reevaluated. And I think there will be a pre-Copenhagen and a post-Copenhagen when it comes to climate negotiations more broadly.
And Jonathan, you think it's a pretty good platform, a good start. You gave it a B+, you told me, in terms of success.
Yeah, I think it's a planetary emergency, and I would like to see nations commit to very rapid reductions in emissions and significant expenditures. I think it's going to improve everyone's lives worldwide, but this was an important foundation stone. Getting in place commitments among all the major sources of emissions, north and south, and the agreement to have those commitments verified is a huge step that was absolutely necessary to move forward.
Is an agreement necessary, though? At least in word, it's nice to point to, but in practicality, there's some arguments, and you've made them yourself, Jonathan, that countries will do what they do with or without a binding treaty.
Yeah, I don't think treaties change behavior. I think countries that have decided to move forward form treaties in order to level the playing field. An agreement is necessary because the big economies want to know the other big economies are moving. But if there was resistance, a binding agreement wouldn't change that resistance.
Even without the binding commitments, Chris, you think nations will follow through on what they've said, at least the big five that were involved in the treaty with the U.S.?
I think the process of preparing for this conference, all of the work that went on within these key governments leading up to it was important and will lead to policy change over time. But the action really is going to be at the national level and even to some extent the state level going forward. because these are not legally binding commitments, there is going to need to be an ongoing effort domestically within each of these countries. And I think that there's a good chance that all of the major countries could actually substantially exceed the goals that they've laid out for themselves. Mm-hmm. Copenhagen is going to help spur that effort, but I think only in a relatively minor way. And now enormous effort needs to be devoted to working at the national level. And I hope all of the groups that were so active, not only NGOs, but businesses and others in Copenhagen will devote equal activity now to working at home.
Can I add one thing?
Please, please.
I strongly agree with what Chris just said, but would add one observation. I have had the experience again and again of going to international negotiations and watching environment ministers negotiate something that has very little impact on their government because they're not the big players. This was not about environment ministers or lower level bureaucrats. This was heads of state sitting there in a room discussing with one another what they were willing to do.
Lash, Flavin, and I also discussed what lies ahead for the international climate negotiations, what comes behind Copenhagen. You can see our entire conversation on the Clean Skies Sunday Year in Review next weekend. That's on the first Sunday of the new year. It's at 9:30 a.m. Eastern on ABC here in the Washington, D.C. area. Now, you know the federal government is considering regulating coal waste for the first time ever. We've reported on this extensively here on Clean Skies News. But did you know, as it's considering that prospect, the government is also encouraging farmers to spread flue gas desulfurization gypsum on their soil. FGD, as it's known, comes from coal-fired power plant scrubbers. The gypsum in question contains mercury, arsenic, and lead as well. But EPA says all of those toxic metals occur in such small amounts that they pose no health threat, and this can actually help loosen and fertilize soil. The American Coal Ash Association says that farmers' use of the material has more than tripled since 2002. And overseas this afternoon, an electrifying announcement from London's mayor. You'll see why we say that. Mayor Boris Johnson is now promising that every Londoner will be no more than 1 mile away from an electric car charging point by the year 2015. 1 mile away. Johnson says the city plans to install 25,000 charging stations all across London and also the surrounding motorways over the next 5 years. The mayor also says that the Greater London Authority next year will release plans detailing how it intends to purchase 1,000 electric vehicles, also with a 2015 deadline. This new electric car program, which will also include incentives to help businesses switch to electric vehicles, is expected to cost nearly $100 million overall. The British government has already promised subsidies of up to $8,000 for motorists who buy electric vehicles. And also from Europe this afternoon, the geologist accused of causing earthquakes while he was drilling for geothermal power in Switzerland, he has now been acquitted. The Swiss court says it found Marcus Herring innocent of those charges because the court says he had not deliberately damaged properties or acted carelessly. His geothermal project was put on hold back in 2006 after that drilling accidentally triggered a series of tremors, including one that reached as high as 3.4 on the Richter scale. The project was permanently shut down earlier this month after a risk analysis concluded that more earthquakes could follow if that drilling continued. Well, that is this edition of the Energy Report. We'll see you back here tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern for our next newscast. And a reminder, if you have any suggestions or comments about our programming here on Clean Skies News, we'd like to hear from you. You can email us anytime in the nation's capital at contact@cleanskies.com. And you can also follow us throughout your day and night as well on Twitter and Facebook. From all of us here in the Energy News Center, we're glad you're with us. I'm Tyler Suiters, and you're watching Clean Skies News.